Picture this. You're sitting across from someone you care about. You're nodding along to their words. You're saying all the right things. But somewhere deep inside, there's a whisper telling you that none of this feels real, that you're playing a part, performing a version of yourself that isn't quite you. And here's the terrifying part. You don't even realize you're doing it. Leo Tolstoy spent his entire life obsessed with this question. How do we betray ourselves without ever noticing? How do we become strangers to our own hearts? And what he discovered will fundamentally change the way you see yourself and everyone around you. Tolstoy wasn't just a novelist. He was a psychological archaeologist, digging through the layers of human self-deception. And what he found in the depths of human consciousness was both beautiful and horrifying. He realized that most people live their entire lives in a state of what he called spiritual sleep, going through the motions, following scripts written by society, family, tradition, never once stopping to ask if any of it actually resonates with who they truly are. In his masterpiece, War and Peace, Tolstoy showed us character after character betraying themselves in the most subtle ways. Pierre Bezukov marrying for status rather than love. Prince Andrei chasing glory on the battlefield while ignoring the emptiness in his soul. Natasha Rostova almost destroying her life by following impulses she didn't understand. And through all of these characters, Tolstoy was asking us one fundamental question. When was the last time you made a choice that came from your authentic self rather than from fear? Obligation or the desperate need to be accepted? The betrayal starts small, so small you don't notice it. You're a child and you love to draw, but your parents tell you that art won't pay the bills, that you need to be practical, so you put down the pencil and pick up the textbook. Not because you want to, but because you've learned that love and approval come with conditions. You're a teenager and you have an opinion that differs from your friends. But instead of speaking up, you laugh along with their jokes, you nod when they speak. You shape yourself into whatever form will keep you included, keep you safe. You're an adult, and you're in a relationship that doesn't fulfill you. But you stay because leaving would mean admitting you made a mistake. Because starting over feels too frightening. Because somewhere along the way you convinced yourself that this is what love is supposed to feel like. Each of these moments is a tiny betrayal, a small compromise. And individually, they seem harmless, forgettable even. But they accumulate like sediment at the bottom of a river until one day you wake up and realize you can't remember the last time you felt truly alive. Tolstoy understood this better than almost anyone because he lived it. He was born into Russian aristocracy, blessed with every privilege imaginable, wealth, education, social status, and yet he spent decades feeling like a fraud. In his autobiographical work, A Confession, Tolstoy described how he followed all the rules. He pursued literary fame. He indulged in pleasures. He did everything society told him would bring happiness, and yet the emptiness only grew. He wrote about standing on the edge of his estate, rope in hand, seriously considering ending his life, because nothing he had achieved felt real. Nothing felt like it came from his true self. Here was a man who had everything, and yet he had nothing, because he had spent so long betraying his authentic nature that he no longer knew who he was. The mechanism of self-betrayal that Tolstoy identified is insidious because it disguises itself as virtue. We tell ourselves we're being responsible when we ignore our dreams. We tell ourselves we're being mature when we suppress our emotions. We tell ourselves we're being kind when we avoid difficult conversations. In Anna Karenina, Tolstoy gave us perhaps the most devastating portrait of self-betrayal ever written through the character of Anna herself. She's trapped in a loveless marriage to Karenin, a man who treats life like a bureaucratic function, who values propriety over passion, form over feeling. Anna knows she's dying inside. She can feel the life draining from her with each passing day. But she stays because that's what good women do. Because society has taught her that her duty is more important than her happiness. Because betraying society feels worse than betraying herself. Then she meets Vronsky, and for the first time in years, she feels alive, she feels seen, she feels real. But here's where Tolstoy's genius shows. Anna's tragedy isn't just that society condemns her for choosing love. It's that she's been so thoroughly conditioned to betray herself that even when she tries to be authentic, she can't fully commit to it. She's haunted by guilt, consumed by anxiety, unable to trust her own feelings because she's spent so long denying them. The betrayal has become so deeply embedded in her psyche that she can't distinguish between her authentic voice and the voices of all the people who shaped her. She ends up betraying herself in both directions. First, by staying in the loveless marriage, then by being unable to fully embrace the love she chose. This is the trap that Tolstoy wants us to see. We betray ourselves so consistently and for so long that we lose the ability to recognize what authenticity even feels like. We become like actors who've played the same role for so many years that they can't remember their real personality anymore. And the most dangerous part is that this betrayal feels normal. It feels like maturity, like wisdom, like the natural process of growing up and fitting into the world. Tolstoy showed us through character after character that what we call adaptation is often just slow spiritual suicide. Think about the last time you said yes when everything in you wanted to say no. Maybe it was taking on extra work when you were already exhausted. Maybe it was going to a social event you dreaded. Maybe it was agreeing with an opinion you didn't actually hold. In that moment you betrayed yourself, and I'm willing to bet you justified it immediately. You told yourself it was no big deal, that you were being flexible, that sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do. And you're right, life requires compromise. But Tolstoy would ask you to examine the difference between healthy compromise and self-betrayal. A healthy compromise honors your authentic self while acknowledging external realities. Self-betrayal abandons your authentic self to avoid discomfort, conflict, or the risk of being rejected. In War and Peace, Tolstoy gave us Pierre Bezukhov as a case study in awakening from self-betrayal. Pierre spends the first half of the novel betraying himself constantly. He marries Helene because she's beautiful, and because everyone expects him to, not because he loves her or even likes her. He joins the Freemasons searching for meaning, but follows their rules, without questioning whether they resonate with his soul. He's perpetually asking other people what he should think, what he should believe, who he should be. He's a man of enormous wealth and intelligence who has handed over the authorship of his life to everyone except himself. Then he's captured by the French during the war. He loses everything, his freedom, his status, his illusions, and in that stripping away, he finally encounters himself. He meets a peasant soldier named Platon Karatev, who lives with a simplicity and authenticity that Pierre has never experienced. And for the first time, Pierre begins to understand what it means to be true to yourself. Not in some grand theatrical way, but in small moments of genuine feeling and honest response. Tolstoy shows us that self-betrayal isn't just an individual problem, it's a cultural epidemic. We live in societies that are built on making people doubt their authentic selves. From the moment we're born, we're taught to seek validation outside ourselves. We're taught that our worth depends on our achievements, our appearance, our ability to conform to expectations. We're taught to fear our own desires, to be suspicious of our own judgments, to constantly check ourselves against external standards. And the result is that most people spend their entire lives in a state of low-grade betrayal, never quite trusting themselves, never quite feeling real. The tragedy is that we don't even realize we're doing it. We think we're living our lives, but we're actually living scripts, roles, personas that we've constructed to navigate social reality. Tolstoy saw this everywhere he looked. In his later years, he became increasingly radical in his critique of society, arguing that most of what we consider civilization is actually an elaborate system for preventing people from being authentic. He looked at the church and saw institutions that taught people to betray their direct spiritual experience in favor of dogma. He looked at the state and saw structures that taught people to betray their conscience in favor of obedience. He looked at marriage and saw contracts that taught people to betray their hearts in favor of stability. He wasn't saying these institutions were entirely bad. He was saying they had become so corrupt, so disconnected from genuine human needs, that they were turning people into actors in a play they never auditioned for. The question then becomes, how do we stop? How do we wake up from this spiritual sleep that Tolstoy described? How do we learn to recognize the moments when we're betraying ourselves? The first step, Tolstoy would say, is attention. You have to start paying attention to the gap between what you're doing and what you're feeling. Notice when you say yes, but your body tenses up. Notice when you smile, but your chest feels tight. Notice when you're talking to someone, but your mind is somewhere else. These physical and emotional signals are your authentic self trying to get your attention, trying to tell you that something is off, that you're betraying yourself in this moment. But we've been trained to ignore these signals, to push through them, to tell ourselves they don't matter. Tolstoy would say they matter more than anything. They're the voice of your soul, and if you keep ignoring it, eventually it will go silent. The second step is honesty, brutal, unflinching honesty with yourself about who you actually are versus who you pretend to be. This is terrifying because it means admitting all the ways you've been living a lie, all the choices you've made for the wrong reasons, all the relationships you've maintained out of obligation rather than love. In a confession, Tolstoy described the moment he stopped lying to himself about his life, and he said it felt like dying, like everything he thought he was collapsed, and he was left with nothing but raw truth. But on the other side of that death was something new, something real. He discovered that when you stop betraying yourself, you don't disappear. You actually appear for the first time. The third step is courage, because once you see how you've been betraying yourself, you can't unsee it, and now you have a choice. You can go back to sleep, tell yourself it's too late to change, that this is just how life is, that being authentic is a luxury you can't afford. Or you can start making different choices, small ones at first, saying no when you mean no, expressing your actual opinion, even if it's unpopular, doing something for no reason other than it brings you joy. These choices will feel impossibly difficult at first because you've spent years building your life around self-betrayal. You've constructed relationships, careers, identities based on being someone you're not. Changing means risking all of that. It means some people might not like the real you. It means you might have to walk away from situations that no longer serve you. It means living with uncertainty. Tolstoy wrote extensively about this courage in his later works. After his spiritual crisis, he tried to live authentically, even though it made him a pariah in his own social class. He gave away his wealth. He dressed like a peasant. He rejected the literary fame he had worked so hard to achieve. His wife thought he was insane. His friends were embarrassed by him. Society mocked him. But he said he finally felt alive. He finally felt like he was living his own life, rather than a life that had been prescribed for him. Now, I'm not suggesting you need to give away all your possessions and live like Tolstoy, but I am suggesting that real authenticity will cost you something. It always does. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price, or if you'd rather keep betraying yourself because it's safer. Here's what makes self-betrayal so pernicious. It convinces you that the cage you're in is actually freedom. You tell yourself you're choosing this job, even though it makes you miserable. You tell yourself you're choosing this relationship, even though it drains you. You tell yourself you're choosing this lifestyle, even though it feels hollow. And technically, you are choosing it, but you're choosing it from a place of fear, conditioning, and disconnection from your authentic self. Tolstoy would say that's not real choice. That's just a more sophisticated form of slavery. Real choice comes from knowing yourself deeply, from understanding what actually matters to you versus what you've been told should matter, from having the courage to honor your truth, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. In his fiction, Tolstoy often used death as the moment when characters finally wake up to how they've betrayed themselves. Ivan Ilyich spends his entire life pursuing status and respectability. He does everything right according to society's standards. And then he gets sick, and as he's dying, he realizes that his whole life has been a lie, that he's never once asked himself what he actually wanted, what would actually make him happy. He's been so busy performing the role of successful man that he forgot to become a real human being. It's a devastating story, because by the time Ivan sees the truth, it's too late to change course. He can only lie there and feel the weight of all those wasted years, all those betrayed moments. But Tolstoy didn't write these stories to depress us. He wrote them to wake us up before it's too late. He wanted us to have our crisis now, while we still have time to change, while we can still choose differently. The question he's asking through all his work is this: are you living a life that's true to your deepest self? Or are you living a life that's been designed by fear, obligation, and the need for approval? Are you making choices from your center or from your surface? Are you following your own path or walking a trail that someone else carved out? These questions are uncomfortable because most of us will have to admit that we've betrayed ourselves in significant ways. Maybe you chose a career path because it was safe rather than because it excited you. Maybe you're in a relationship because being alone felt too frightening rather than because this person truly sees you. Maybe you've suppressed parts of your personality because they didn't fit the image you wanted to project. Maybe you've avoided difficult conversations because maintaining false peace felt easier than risking real conflict. Each of these is a betrayal, and each one distances you further from your authentic self. Tolstoy believed that this distance from ourselves is the root of most human suffering. When you're disconnected from your authentic self, you're constantly anxious because you're trying to maintain a performance that isn't natural. You're constantly exhausted because you're pouring energy into being someone you're not. You're constantly unsatisfied because no amount of external validation can fill the void created by internal betrayal. You achieve things and feel empty. You're surrounded by people and feel alone. You're busy all the time and feel like nothing matters. This is the spiritual crisis that Tolstoy documented so brilliantly in his work. The crisis that comes from living at a distance from yourself. The path back to yourself that Tolstoy outlined isn't about making one dramatic change. It's about practicing authenticity in small moments throughout your day. It's about noticing when you're performing versus when you're being real. It's about catching yourself in the act of betrayal and choosing differently. It's about slowly building trust with yourself again by keeping the small promises you make to your soul. When your body says it's tired, rest instead of pushing through. When your heart says this doesn't feel right, pay attention instead of overriding it with logic. When your gut says this person isn't safe, believe it instead of talking yourself out of it. These small acts of self-trust accumulate over time until you've rebuilt the relationship with yourself that self-betrayal destroyed. Tolstoy also understood that this journey isn't linear, and it isn't easy. In his own life, he struggled constantly with the gap between his ideals and his actions. He wrote about wanting to live simply, but struggled to give up his comforts. He wrote about universal love, but had a tumultuous relationship with his wife. He preached authenticity, but sometimes fell back into old patterns of people-pleasing and status-seeking. He didn't present himself as someone who had figured it all out. He presented himself as someone who was struggling with the same questions he was asking his readers to consider. And that's actually encouraging, because it means you don't have to be perfect at authenticity. You just have to be committed to the practice of returning to yourself again and again. One of the most powerful insights Tolstoy offered is that self-betrayal isn't just about the big life decisions. It's about how you show up in ordinary moments. Do you tell the truth about how you're feeling, or do you say you're fine when you're not? Do you express your actual preferences, or do you always defer to what others want? Do you honor your needs, or do you treat them as inconvenient obstacles to being liked? These everyday interactions are where authenticity is either practiced or betrayed. Most people think they'll start being authentic when the big moment comes, when they have to make a major life decision. But Tolstoy understood that if you're betraying yourself in the small moments, you'll betray yourself in the big ones too. Authenticity is a muscle, and if you don't exercise it daily, it atrophies. The really radical thing about Tolstoy's vision is that he believed being authentic wasn't just good for you as an individual, it was good for everyone around you. When you stop betraying yourself, you stop participating in all the social games that keep everyone trapped in inauthenticity. You stop pretending you agree when you don't, which gives others permission to do the same. You stop hiding your struggles, which allows others to stop performing perfection. You stop laughing at jokes that aren't funny, going along with plans you hate, supporting causes you don't believe in, and your authenticity creates space for others to be authentic too. Tolstoy saw social transformation and personal transformation as inseparable. You can't have a society of authentic people if individuals keep betraying themselves. And you can't truly be authentic as an individual without that authenticity rippling out and affecting your relationships, your community, your culture. The ultimate question Tolstoy leaves us with is this: what would your life look like if you stopped betraying yourself? Not in some hypothetical future, but starting right now, in this moment, what would change? Would you still be in the same relationships, the same job, the same city? Would you still spend your time the same way, pursue the same goals, maintain the same image? Or would things start to shift, slowly at first, and then more dramatically, as you aligned your external life with your internal truth? This isn't about blowing up your life impulsively. It's about getting honest about where you've been living at a distance from yourself and beginning the slow, patient work of coming home. Tolstoy spent his final years living in a train station, having left his estate in one last attempt to live authentically, to break free from the constraints of his old life. He died there at age 82, still struggling, still seeking, still trying to close the gap between his ideals and his reality. Some people look at this and see failure, an old man who couldn't make peace with his life. But I think Tolstoy would say that the real failure isn't struggling with these questions. The real failure is never asking them at all, living your entire life in spiritual sleep, betraying yourself so consistently that you forget there's anything to betray. He understood that waking up is uncomfortable, that seeing the truth about how you've betrayed yourself is painful, that choosing authenticity will cost you things you thought you couldn't live without. But he also understood that the alternative, living as a stranger to yourself, performing a role in someone else's play, is a kind of death in life. And when you really understand that, when you feel it in your bones, you realize you don't have a choice. You have to stop betraying yourself, because continuing to do so isn't really living at all.